Okay, this is a webinar on complacency in law enforcement. And the reason I'm putting this on is I want to bring a little bit of light to what complacency is and how we think about it. This is a recorded video, so this will be available on YouTube, hopefully by the end of the day or tomorrow. I want to talk about complacency. We all think about complacency as one thing. We think about it as the person's lazy or they're careless. And for a lot of times in law enforcement, that's what it's become, because that's what we see out there. We see people that are complacent, they're lazy, they don't remember their training or ignore their training, and they act the way they're going to act. And this is how we've come to see it. And what I want to do is I want to expand on that a little bit, because everything that I'm saying about people just being lazy and careless and not paying attention to their training is all true. And there is that mindset, that psychology behind how we think and how we go about our day that plays into whether we're complacent or not. But I want to expand what complacency really is and let you look at it a different way, because throughout my time in law enforcement, 20 years now, I've heard probably 10,000 times, never be complacent, don't be complacent, to the point to where the word kind of lost meaning because I heard it so often. And what I wanted to do is go into a little about the fact that, one, you're going to be complacent. If you can manage to spend a 20-year or 30-year career in law enforcement and never be complacent one day, you're going to burn yourself out. And I don't mean to make light of this by any ways, but some people, they act at that alert stage for so long. When they come off that alert stage of retirement, or when something else happens in their career, they power down, they just can't do it. So we have our days. Now, complacency could be a lot of different factors play in, and I've labeled them to 4 factors that I want to talk about for complacency. And I believe these better explain the psychological and the physiological and the external reasons that we might be complacent, and how really good officers can get just as complacent as somebody who has a poor mindset. And I'm not saying that, hey, you're going to be complacent, don't worry about it anymore, but I want to bring to light some of the reasons for it. And then we can get into how to guard against it. Now, it's divided into 4 sections. One is psychology. The second is mindset. We have training, and we have operational. These are the 4 ways that I've looked at complacency. And then we're going to get into why people make the decisions they do, what factors are involved in their decision-making and behaviors as a general rule, and make that kind of specific to law enforcement and military. Now, it can work for anybody. It's not just these 2, but this is what we're talking about today. But you can apply this in a number of other settings. So the first I want to get into, I know I said psychology first, but I want to get into mindset. Mindset is how we think. And it's how our brain is functioning throughout the day. I don't mean how it's working, but how we look at the day, how we address the situations around us. So really at what speed your brain is working. Now, we talk about mindset and we talk about how we should have a good mindset, but that really doesn't tell you what a good mindset is. Yeah, you want to go to work. Yeah, you're out there, you're going to go to work, and we hype each other up and we have a great mindset. And how many times do you hear that in law enforcement? Have a good mindset. After training, during roll call lineups, throughout the time when you're there, supervisors, have a good mindset. Well, in a lot of ways, I feel we treat mindset as a pair of pants. You got to go to work with a pair of pants, or you should. And so you got to go to work with a good mindset. Well, I mean, that really, we teach it as something here, just take with you, like here's your belt, your vest, and your pants, and your boots, and all that stuff. Take your mindset with you. Let me give you a good example. You could be so hyped up. Yay, I'm a good cop. I can do this job. And you're so excited and energetic to be there. And you go out and you come across a really bad guy, and a really big bad guy. And you say, you're under arrest. And he says, there's no way you're taking me to jail. I'm going to fight you to the death. Now, if your mindset may be, yeah, we're going to go, but if you haven't spent the years training and working out, getting yourself in good shape, understanding tactics, go to martial arts classes, boxing classes, practice with a friend, is that mindset going to be there? Is that mindset going to fail you at that time? Because do you think if you haven't prepared one time or one day for this event, is that mindset going to be as strong as it was when you left the roll call room or when you got out of your patrol car? It's a good chance it's not. So developing a mindset isn't something where we can just say, hey, have a good mindset, because that's easy. But deciding you want to have a good mindset, learning what a good mindset is, that's the beginning stage. That's just understanding, you know what, I should go to the gym because I should get better in shape. Okay, that's great. And I'm going to eat a little better too. Great. But if you don't get out of that stage and actually go and start, what did this one stage do for you? Anyone can say, I want to do something. They have to put forward the effort to do it. So now, with how does that play into this? Mindset is something that's built over a lifetime. Now, I'm not saying you can't shorten it in certain ways. If you're not in very good shape and you hit the gym, the mindset can change because now you're in better shape after 6 months, a year. Martial arts the same way. You could get beaten up and have your lunch money taken, and then all of a sudden you go into some kind of fighting class, gives you more confidence, it changes your whole personality around after 6 months or a year. Great, it can change a little bit. And that's what I'm getting at. Mindsets can change, but we have to prepare for that mindset. Police academy fighting, defensive tactics, our yearly in-service and classes. Is that going to make you a fighter to the degree of something where you can take on someone out on the street? Maybe, maybe not. That has to be something you have to realistically look at and develop the type of mindset. Now, some people have a good game. They're gung-ho, but inside they realize, I've never done this before. Now, when I train new law enforcement officers, I come across one question that I ask in the very beginning. How many people have been punched in the face by someone they don't know at a time when you didn't know where it was going to end? So you're in a real street fight with a stranger and you get punched in the face. Now, the first time you get punched in the face, anyone will tell you who's been punched dead square in the face by someone who can actually hit. It is a very confusing time to where you're probably knocked back a little bit. You get that flash of light. There's the pain. There's the you're probably going to get a bloody nose, or your nasal cavities let go, and there's just that shock. Now, I know the first time I got hit in the face, the first time, luckily it was when I was younger. It was in 8th grade, but I remember the shock of it. It took me a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds to kind of bounce back. Now, after time, you'll learn to bounce back immediately, but it changed my mindset during that fight the first time because it was something I hadn't experienced, hadn't prepared myself for, and really had no concept of. So there was my mindset, changed right off the bat. And that's the one thing in law enforcement. It's a hard thing to do. We can't take new recruits and go walk them down the street and have some stranger come out and punch them in the face. There's always an element of training that this is safe. You might hurt, you might have a little injury, but in the end result, you're safe. So developing a proper mindset is something in law enforcement is very hard to do. Even in the military, they can simulate a lot of things in the military, but I haven't seen military training yet where they can simulate actual full combat. And that's one of the issues. Now, if you look at military training, if we look at like 1 is no stress and a 10 is, oh my God, I'm going to die and probably pretty horribly, we're all somewhere in the middle. Hopefully we're right around 2 or 3 throughout our day. 3 is, my boss is mad, I might get written up or something like that. 4, 5, 6, maybe you're having some significant family issues, but we don't venture to 8, 9, and 10 hardly ever in our lives. So jumping from a 3 to a 10, most people can't make that jump and be able to act accordingly or act at all. So what the military does, they try and bring you to an 8. Why boot camp is so extreme. They bring you to an 8. So when you have to make that 8 to a 10, because they know they can't really simulate a 10, but if they bring you to an 8, and you can function normally at an 8, jumping from an 8 to a 10, you're going to be able to follow simple orders. You're going to be able to realize, hey, my weapon's out of ammunition, I should reload it. Whereas you might not have if you haven't been able to get to 8. You'll be able to follow clear, simple malfunction. You'll be able to do the basic things that someone in 10 needs to do to survive. So we can't really do that. So it has to do with mindset, is developing a proper mindset. And in many times we don't really understand the concept of a mindset. So it seems to, it's kind of hard to really build one in law enforcement because we treat it like a pair of pants in a lot of cases. And that's one of the problems. So now that I've talked a little about what I feel what mindset is, now I want to talk about how people are applying their mindset. There are people that get into any career and they all have different levels of how they prepare themselves. Their strengths or weaknesses. There's some people that jump into law enforcement or military and they are a fighter, true and true. You're going to put them in the worst areas, put them in the worst battles, and that's what they're made for. Other people, they're more on the admin side. You don't want them anywhere near something big and bad. You want them, they're going to be great detectives. They're going to be great admin people. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and that diversity forms a team all to function. You look at, I believe I saw one statistic. If you look at military, only 25% of the military on average is actual rifle in hand, boots on the ground. The 75%, and more in some cases, is support, logistics. So it's not even clear. There's a big way to have a team. So the mindsets can be a lot different depending on across the board. But I look at the law enforcement part. How are people prepared? And no matter what they say on the outside, how they prepare inside. How is their abilities to do their job? How do they feel about those abilities to do their job? And that plays into how we react around other people. And I know I'm kind of getting a lot into the mindset thing, but this is going to start playing into how we look at other things later on when I explain the other three parts. So in the beginning, I talked about, you're absolutely right if you think someone is just checked out, they're lazy, they don't follow their training, they don't really take into account the safety issues, poor officer safety. All those are true too. And some people have that mindset of, I've been there, I've done this. And we're going to divide it into two ways. We're going to divide the mindset when we look at people's attitude toward the calls of, I got this because I've been through so many things in the past, this is nothing to me. Or, I don't realize there's a threat. And that's another big thing. Some people don't realize there's a threat. Now, why would that be? Think about our time in law enforcement. I've been in this job 20 years. I can count the amount of times on one hand that I have been fought by someone who legitimately wanted to hurt me. Not just fighting to get away, legitimately wanting to hurt me. And when I talk to other officers, that number's not far off. Now, I'm not saying there could be some that are more or less, but we figure the amount of fights we get into. Most people do what I say. The uniform, my presence, the situation. 90+% of the people do what we say simply because you're in a uniform with a badge on. The overwhelming majority of our calls go the way we want them to go. And that's a bad thing. It's a good thing, but it's a bad thing for up here. Because if I give you the same thing to do day in and day out. Now, I brought this up to officers, and maybe I hope everyone here agrees. We look at some of our major calls that we take. Not major, but the ones we take a lot. Domestic disputes, vehicle burglaries, disturbance calls. So domestic disputes is something law enforcement deals with across the board. If you went back into your system and you pulled 5 domestic abuse reports and put them in a file, and you could just change the names, the dates, and the location, could you use those 5 reports for almost all your reports? For probably 90+% of all the reports you'll write in the future, you can probably use those same reports. And every time I ask this question in classes, everyone says, yeah, probably. It's a good chance. I'll use a lot. I'll use them over and over again. Very few times does it deviate from where I went and what I did. So what does that do for us? We get a mindset of, I've got this because I've done this 300 times before and the outcome was the same. Any other time you do something 300 times before, 1,000 times before, and the outcome is the same, your brain gets into a lull. Your brain gets into a pattern. It runs a script. And it gets into it. And we do it all the time. take outside law enforcement. When you go to a restaurant, what happens? Does anyone have to relearn how to go to a restaurant? Probably not. If you go to Outback or you go to Chili's or you go to any other restaurant, really, you walk in, you get a table, someone comes around, takes your drink order, you look at a menu, you order your food, you eat your food, you pay for your food, you leave. It doesn't change from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant. Now, you may go to a counter and get your food and sit down, but other than those two functions, the restaurant's the exact same thing everywhere you go. You don't have to relearn it to go to another restaurant. When I drive to work, I don't have to think about where I'm going. So our life is made to shorten things. Our brain works to shorten our functions, to shorten the brain functions, to make things easier for us to think of. So when I go to a restaurant, I already have that little file, what happens in a restaurant. When I go to a class, I have that file, how I'm supposed to act in a class. So I have all these things that are all lined up to help my brain work. In law enforcement, we develop these files to make, oh, I've done this before. Oh, I have this before. And if you look at it, if you look at statistics where we get hurt in law enforcement, it's not, the statistics are not high. When I have a bad call, person with a gun, active shooter events, these really violent events, law enforcement doesn't get hurt that often with the frequency that we would think. Because we go there, it's a new event. We don't have a script for this because it doesn't happen every single day. So what we do is we're thinking now more on our feet. Where do law enforcement officers get hurt a lot? Two of the biggest ones are traffic stops and domestic disputes. And statistically, some of those are the highest calls we go to. What are some of the other calls they get? Simple disturbance calls. How many times do we go to them in our career? Thousands, probably. Suspicious person calls. Now we go to a few that are legit. You think something's really bad, but a lot of times, what is it? It's probably on the minor end of what suspicious is. People selling some drugs, maybe some prostitution in the area, someone hanging around a place they shouldn't be, homeless guy in front of a store hassling customers who might come out as a suspicious person. The minor ones that we look at. I don't think they should be minor because they could hurt someone just as easily, but think about what we have in there. Think of what we have in our head. How many times do we go to those calls? How many times are you ramped up to go to war because there's a homeless guy out front of a store hassling people for change? Probably not that often. How many times are you ready to go to war and battle every time you pull someone over? I mean, that's only a question you could answer. For the most part, it's probably not a lot. Because I watch hundreds and probably thousands of videos on YouTube from various other sources about law enforcement actions, and not just the ones you see on some of the channels where it's always something bad, but just your regular ones, your regular traffic stops where nothing happened. I'm looking at the deputy's body language. I'm looking at their attitude. I'm looking at their mindset to see, are they ready for this? Most of the time, I don't see a readiness. I'm going to tell you an example of one I saw. There's an officer who gets out of the car on a traffic stop, and he walks over to the passenger side of the vehicle, and you can see vaguely the officer's reflection in the mirror of the car, the window of the car. And he's looking, and he can see the guy, the driver, who's looking back like this on the passenger side looking for the officer. Now, it's been a couple seconds. It seems logical to me that a person would look back to see, hey, where is he? So I didn't think too much of it. And then I see the officer go, ah, and I heard the in his voice. He's frustrated. When you get frustration, it's a type of stress. And if you know anything about stress, as stress goes up, your ability to make a decision goes down because your mind's preoccupied. He walked around the car. The second he walks to the back of the car, turns the corner to get to the driver's side of the car, the guy's waiting there with a rifle. And the officer falls back. He gets hit. Not with a rifle. I think he hit him with the gun. He fell back. Good tactic, because as he's falling back, he did draw. He did fire a couple shots, but it was fast. And I give the officer a lot of credit. It was a great movement. But you could see his frustration. He wasn't taking it seriously. He did not think that was going to happen. You could tell by just a reflection. He's looking like, oh, really? Now, he got lucky, And I'm not saying skill didn't have anything to do with it, but what I'm saying is, was he ready for that? No. He did well, though. I'm not going to take it away from him. But I just look at a lot of these videos, and I look at the officer's reaction. People walk up. They just walk right up to the window. As they're walking back, they have their back turned toward them. So there's a lot of things that we do because, and it's hard not to, because our brain is stuck in that mode of saying, I've done this 1,000 times before. So now I want to kind of move on because I want to talk about mindset and how mindsets start and how do we really prepare for them, because I didn't really go into it. How do you prepare? How do you make it not just a pair of pants? Do I go to karate class? Do I go to law class? Do I go to this class? It's not about that, and I'll talk about that at the end. The next part is psychology, because mindset you can change. Mindset is something you can say, you know what, I need to change this. I'm a different mindset. I'm going to go about it. It's probably the most changeable thing out of the four is the mindset. The psychology of it's a little harder to change. Now, recently in law enforcement flavoring of the month, we hear the word bias a lot. There's a lot of classes going on, a lot of talk about law enforcement bias, and don't be biased, and you have to be biased. Your brain works that way. And a bias isn't saying, well, I don't like this group of people because of, I don't like this person because of this, and oh, I don't like people that think like that and look like that. That could be a bias, but what I'm talking about bias is, just like where I gave a restaurant example, when you walk into a restaurant, your brain's already set up with a little plan about how a restaurant works. Biases are the same way. Biases are shortcuts in our brain. Now, could they be, if you've had negative experiences with a certain group or type of people, that you'll have a bias? I don't really like that group or type of people. Sure, that's how everything works. So there can be that, but there's also some different ways that we look at bias. If everyone listens to what we say the first time we say in law enforcement, I'm wearing this uniform, and you know what? No one's ever told me no. No one's ever resisted. No one's whatever this. It forms a bias in your head. And when I say bias, they're technically biases, but it forms a plan saying, this is what they do when I do this. So now you have a plan of action in your head that when I do this, no one's going to fight me back. And you could be ready for certain times. And a lot of times we'll see things and we'll be like, okay, this is different now. But sometimes we don't see it. And I'm going to give you some good examples in this. Now, the biggest bias that we have to deal with is the normalcy bias. The normalcy bias is whatever you think is normal, your brain will see. Now, it has a lot to do with the reticular activating system, the RAS, I'll call it. It's a part of the brain that basically is the filter on your brain. If you think about going out on a street, and the street in the middle of a nice neighborhood, good view, lots of stuff in there. Think about how much your brain is taking in, your eyes are taking in your brains. There's millions of pieces of data that your eyes and your brain are accepting right in this time. But you don't have all that information because your brain says this is too much information. Let me just focus on what you need. So it gives you what you need to look for. Make sure you don't get hit by a car, other people, addresses, the buildings around you. But it doesn't tell you how many squirrels are in a tree, how many windows a certain building has. All that's in your brain. It's taken in everything, but it only gives you really what you need. And it stops you from being overwhelmed. Now, it also works, and I heard this example a couple times. It's kind of funny. Think of the last car that you bought. You bought that car, you liked it. Everyone likes something a little unique, so you probably got something that you like. It's not like everyone else has. You're driving it home from the dealership, and how many cars did you see just like it? You probably never noticed it any time in your life, but you notice now everyone's got the same car. The RAS gears your brain toward what we're looking for. And because we're thinking about the brand new car we got, now we look and we see 20 of them just like it. Just because now our brain's looking at it. In law enforcement example, it's really good. Hey, a crime just occurs and a red Nissan Sentra just left the area. You will never find more red Nissan Sentras anytime in your life than you will right now, because you didn't even know there were that many out there. And I'm sure we can all probably relate to something similar to that. When you're looking for a car, you find 20 of them in the first 3 blocks. It's just the way it is. They were there the whole time. Your brain just wasn't keyed in on looking for. So this is what the RAS does. It filters and it focuses what we're looking for. Now, I'll give you a good example on how sometimes these things help us and how they hurt us. One, they help us because when we're keyed in toward looking for a specific thing, a person, our brain's cycling all this information. How it helps us, again, you could be at a baseball game and everyone's cheering and the crowd's cheering, and all of a sudden there's a guy from like 6 rows back that knows you from years ago and sees you. They're yelling your name. Well, there's literally thousands of people yelling and cheering, and there's all this noise coming from all these different sources, from the game to the speakers to the guy selling hot dogs and all these people around you. Yet your brain, it just doesn't really react to anything. It's just noise in the background. But it will pick out something familiar that you need to know about, like your name. There's a good chance you'll hear, if sound permits, you'll hear that name because your brain's picking it out as something that we should focus on that. You're always focused on your own name being called out. So your brain really kind of helps you in some ways, and it kind of hurts you in other ways. How else could the RAS help and hurt us? Let's talk about an issue about getting hurt. There was a class being taught where officers were practicing responding to an active shooter in a school. And they geared them up with a little bit of stress. They gave them the face masks. They put some body armor on and said, there's a guy in there with simunition gun. If you know him from doing simunition training, they hurt a little bit. Adds the stress up a little bit because, it's going to sting. So they're gearing them up. They're getting them ready. They got a person in the back shooting blanks off, so the loud bangs going through the school. And they send them in, and they search. Can't find them. They're quick searching buildings and classrooms and going through the thing. And they get to the end, and no one shot. There's no one in there with ammunition. And they're like, how'd it go? Like, well, did we miss him? He's not in there? They're like, no, there's no one in there. There was no shooter. He escaped, was out of the area, whatever. And they did a walkthrough of the training. And as they're walking through, the guys missed 3 bombs. There was no shooter, but they were cued for a shooter, as you would in an active shooter. But they were so queued up on looking for the active shooter, they didn't miss the bomb. Now, one was a backpack that had some wires hanging out of it, which, okay, maybe it's in a school backpack. You might not have looked at it too closely. The other one was, I believe it was a briefcase, and it had something with the briefcase. It was open and it had some components in it or something, a little bit open. So, okay, but the other one was a bomb. Like it was road flares with a clock stuck on it. Like your typical, this is what a bomb looks like in our heads. Road flares, a little, digital clock or something with little wires on it. That's what it was. It was propped up against something in the hallway, and no one saw it. And they're asking, did anyone see this? They didn't see it. They probably would have seen anything that would act like a person because they were ready for that person. They were ready for the shooter. They're ready for the simunition. They're ready to make sure I don't want to get shot with the simunition gun. They missed the bombs. So there's where it could hurt us sometimes. And this is where complacency kind of gets into play. Whereas when I talked about the normalcy bias, things that are normal, you're going to tend to see. You're only going to tend to see the things that are normal because your RAS has focused you on things that you believe are normal. So if I walk into a suspicious call, I'm only going to see the things that my brain thinks are normal. A few years back, and I'm not going to go into specifics because I don't want to get the details wrong, but the story is interesting. It's got to be now 8-10 years ago. The Republicans in Congress were playing a baseball game for charity, and they were practicing at one of the baseball stadiums around DC. And they're doing a practice. It's not the game. They're just out there practicing. It's all congressmen and their aides and whatnot. And there's a photographer there. And he sees a guy walking into the stadium with a gun, a rifle. And it wasn't your typical Secret Service guy. It wasn't, something that looks like a law enforcement officer or some guy in a suit. It was not that. And he sees a person walking into a gun. Well, this is a photographer. And There was a comment made earlier that he said that there was a lot of birds in the area. And as this person's walking in, it's like 6 or 7 in the morning, and as the guy walked by, or he saw him walking in there from a distance, he was thinking to himself, I wonder why someone's here to shoot birds this early in the morning. Now, most of us, if you're watching this, you probably have something to do with law enforcement. We would not be thinking those things, so we'd be thinking gun must be a danger. But this person, that was normal for them. It was not normal to see someone walking into a baseball stadium with a gun. And guess what? Their brain didn't even register as something bad. It registered as, I wonder why this person's here to shoot birds. And then when the shot's going off, it's like, oh my goodness, they're playing baseball. Why is this person shooting birds in the morning? Their brain didn't even think it. It didn't happen until a couple seconds later when it probably keyed in is, uh-oh, there's a problem. So the normalcy bias is extremely strong. Now, there's a video that I use often. It's Sergeant Chestnut. There's a traffic stop. You can YouTube it if you look at Sergeant Chestnut shooting and Sergeant Chestnut traffic stop on YouTube. You find it. It's a great traffic stop. Sergeant Chestnut, 15-year veteran, sergeant, primarily highway interdiction officer around Nashville, Tennessee area. And he pulls over 2 people. Now, I teach this in a class that I teach in body language and deceptive detection and pre-attack indicators. And I use this because there's so many parts to it that you can pull apart from a behavioral standpoint. But the one interesting thing is at the end, he survived the shooting. I'm going to kind of skip ahead. And he wrote an article about what he was thinking. So I want to emphasize on that. And we think about that. Now, what happened is he pulls over 2 people. There's a lot of behavioral cues that something's not right. They're obviously lying because they didn't remember where they were coming from, where they were going. So many inconsistencies in their story. He's hammering out a lot of your typical interdiction questions. Where are you coming from? What are you doing? How you been? What'd you do? What'd you do there? How you know people there? Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? And they're getting all these questions wrong and mixed up. So there's definitely indicators. There's a pair of handcuffs on the floor of the car. They're acting very strange. He gets out. First thing he does, gets on the phone to one of the interdiction hotlines. And he's running the tag into people to see if these guys are on any of the interdiction watch lists. Makes sense. He's thinking there's definitely something going on here. But during that time, the people are walking all over the place and eventually shot him 5 times. He survived it. The vest took it. But in the end, they did an interview. And he said, he took responsibility for it. It wasn't like he was trying to place blame. He said, I thought I had a couple of rogue bounty hunters running dope. And that's what I was looking into. So he thought he had something because his history, this is things he'd found under similar circumstances. So that was normal under these circumstances for it to be rogue bounty hunters running dope. Then his brain stopped seeing all the other indicators, and there was some significant behavioral indicators, including a guy who's standing at the front of his car, and as a friend's talking to him through his mirror, through his side view window as he's talking, the big guy's going like this every time the guy reaches for something. Anyone would look at that and say, he's waiting for a really loud noise. What could this be? Oh, he better get a gun. And I'm watching this, and he didn't notice it. Consistently didn't notice it. The guy did it 5 or 6 times. And there were other indicators as too to bring it along. And because he had in his head, this is rogue bounty hunters, all the other times he dealt with similar situations, he survived it. So where did his normalcy bias take him? That this is normal, that I'll be okay because I was okay all the other times. Now, is it a good way to think? No, but this, and I want to make the distinction. This is not some, as we would consider, poor officer, some bad cop. It was not. These are good cops. These are good officers that do well in a variety of situations, but sometimes the biases creep in because you can't go to every single call at super high alert, right? What are you going to be like after a 25 or 30-year career? It might be tough. So our brain finds ways to shortcut it out. Because let's face it, can you shortcut out a good chunk of your career? Probably. I mean, how many times we do things that things actually bad happen? I work in a pretty active area, and it's pretty slim sometimes. It's a discipline to keep yourself in an alert status. And I'm going into psychology, how do sometimes good officers make bad mistakes? And one is a normalcy bias. Second is change blindness. Change blindness is amazing. If you want a good example, and I'll give you a couple, but if you really want to look into it, it's amazing what people do. Go into YouTube and put in change blindness. Study, experiment, something like that. Play with it a little bit. Some amazing things. And I'll give you a good example of one, the best one you'll find on YouTube. And it's done a couple of different ways. There was a TV show, I believe it was on one of the documentary channels. And a person walks up in a downtown area, lots of pedestrian traffic, walks up to someone who looks like they know where they're going and say, "Excuse me, can you give me directions to," and they'll say like a museum down the street. And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, of course." And they'll start giving directions. Well, then some people walk across the street and they're holding like a big mirror or piece of plywood, and they walk. And as they cut between the two of the people swap out. So now as they go by, now the person's looking at a different person. And you'd be surprised how many times a person didn't even notice that they're talking to a different person. And then they started switching it up. People of different races, people of different genders. And I think they said at the end of the average was only 70% of the people didn't notice. And the people that did notice, like when they switch people there's extreme differences, you might see them kind of tilt their head and like, huh? And then just go right back into it. Like they pause for a second, like something's not right here, but they didn't have that confidence to really change their course. They just went back on explaining to where the directions were. Now, why does that happen? It's because, one, we're not expecting change. What we're doing seems normal. Giving someone directions on the street, it's a normal function. It doesn't normally elicit any type of, suspicion. And we don't notice changes because we're not looking for changes. Because we think we know what's going on. It's the same as a normalcy bias. We're just not noticing changes. We don't see the changes that happen because our brain is not in that mindset of looking for differences and changes. Now, in law enforcement, how can this help? How can this change? How can this benefit us? Where's the dangers and benefits? Well, some of the dangers are we may not notice changes in behavior, in mood, body language, to where people feel, officer's just talking to me, no big deal. He's never going to find the dope or the gun in my pocket. And everyone's, uh-oh, he's asking more questions. Oh, looks like I'm going to get handcuffed. Now you're looking at the changes. And I watch videos of how, from a distance, just looking at this from a video, not involved in the situation, I see these changes like clear as day. I bring them into classes and say, what do you see? We see the changes. Officer doesn't see the changes because he's not expecting it. He's not looking for the changes because he doesn't think they're there. His mindset is, this is just like all the other ones. Because just like all the other ones, sadly, works for us. That's really what it is. We do things 1,000 times only to have it most of the time come out on a positive throughout our whole career. So it's very hard for us to say, I'm going to be at my peak optimum way of looking at things every time. So that's just a way of looking at the psychology. So our brain almost works against us in a way. Now, we're going to go into how we fix this. So we have mindset. Sometimes how our mindset is, we go out, have we developed a proper mindset? Is the mindset going to help us? Have we developed it? And it also developed all the backstory behind the mindset to make everything work. Do we have a poor mindset? And how does that affect us? So we've gone into mindset. Now we've looked at psychology, a little about how does this affect you? How does your psychology work for you or against you, depending on how you're looking at it? In many cases, we find out it works against us. We have to find a way to help us work for us. And I'm going to go into that, but now we're going to jump on to training. So we have mindset, we did psychology and mindset. We're going to go into training. After this, we have operational. So now training, we look at our law enforcement training. And let's think about it. I've been to 2 police academies. I've worked for 2 different agencies, a variety of different assignments within those agencies, and I am a law enforcement trainer. I have my own company, Behavioral Analysis Training Group, and I travel around the country and I teach behavioral analysis and some different psychology issues. And I work a lot with other trainers. And this is what I've seen as far as law enforcement training goes. Let's think about the type of training we have. Who sets up our training? Let's think of our standard academy. Most states have a curriculum handed down by the state for all the academies to go through. Okay. How is that training? I mean, I haven't been to too many academies where everyone's like, I got stellar training, I can handle the world, I can take on this person, I'm practically a ninja. You know, most of the people don't have that aspect. Yeah, there's some good stuff. There's, you know, some punches, strikes, kicks. Some academies really get into the boxing, let you get hit, let you punch, realize what it's like to be in a fight. Other ones is a little bit more static. It's a little bit more safe because we don't want to hurt anybody. So I've noticed a lot of training in law enforcement, government in general, is cookie cutter, where we're going through, we have a certain amount of time, we're going to learn a certain amount of things. Because we have to learn how to punch, we have to learn how to kick. Well, you can punch and kick a bag for 3,000 days, 3,000 times, throw out a number. But if you've never done it in real life, in a real person, in a real life scenario, how much does punching and kicking a bag really help you? It might give you some form and technique. Same with shooting. You can shoot targets all day. Shooting a target does not compare to shooting under stress, an active person when you're getting shot at. Can't compare the two. Obviously, it builds fundamentals because you want to have those, but does it really help you? Let's just not get into that too much. Let's just take it at that. So we have a lot of cookie cutter training. And how many times is it brought about, is it designed by people that are working actively in law enforcement? Or does it come from the state? Does it come from our upper administration? Now, I have a great upper administration, but I know they haven't really worked road patrol in probably decades, some of that. Some of them many decades, 2 and 3 decades. Is law enforcement the same now as it was back then? Are the things now as useful as they were back then? Look at how many people now are into mixed martial arts, into jiu-jitsu. You know, there's different ways of fighting. There's different, people are doing different things now. Is the same punches and kicks and strikes still viable as we were doing when my dad was in law enforcement in the 60s? We can debate that all, but I just want to put it out that a lot of it's cookie cutter training. They're just giving you what they feel you need to know. They're checking boxes. Now, why do I say cookie cutter training? Because we can get some benefit out of it. I'm not trying to downplay the training, but let's think about how it's being taught. I've been to a lot of training, and I hope I'm wrong with the training that you're getting, but let me just tell you my type of experiences in training. You can't fail unless you completely just walk out of the room. Punch, 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 punch. They want to see you have the form and technique and your cattle card out. Are they really in there to teach you how to be a fighter, or are they just making sure you know the skills so they can get you out? It's been my experience in a lot of cases, they're just trying to make sure you have the skill and then get out the door because they have 30 behind you and they only have 2 hours to get it done. So the mindset of the instructor sometime is, I just have to get them proficient and they can get out the door. Well, okay. I did have a core set of instructors though at one time in my training that told me, as you're punching, you picture in your mind a person trying to hurt you, trying to kill you. Never look at this as a bag. Never look at it as you're just punching. You should never see a punching bag your entire life, because you're not doing that punching for exercise. You're not punching a bag. You're punching a person at a time when you need it most. And that stuck with me. I've never seen a punching bag in my training. I've always seen somebody there going to hurt me. Kill me, because that's the only time I'm really going to use this. I don't go out and take people's lunch money and beat them up. So the only time I'm really going to get in physical altercation is when I need it, and when I need it bad. So I don't want to picture a punching bag, because a punching bag's for exercise. If I decide that I get out of law enforcement, I'm going to become a pacifist and never get into a fight, then maybe a punching bag is what I'll see, because I'm only doing it for exercise. I'm not doing it for a hope of self-defense. But how many times have we heard that? How many times have we not only heard it, how many times have people actually made you do this and made it a requirement of the class that you never ever see a punching bag? I brought that up to a lot of people in a lot of training scenarios, and someone says, I've never heard that. You should never see a punching bag. So there's one way. How are we teaching this? Are we teaching this is a fight? Sometimes the pre-lecture from the class is pretty good. You know, we talk about safety, this will save your life, they get into it, but the actual application is a little bit more static, cookie cutter. Now, in the academy is one thing, but now let's talk about ongoing training in law enforcement. You have to train every year. Well, they throw a bunch of people into the rooms, and I've always said this about a lot of our law enforcement training. They bring you in to make sure you still remember how to punch, kick, strike with your baton, the basics. Does anyone want to be there? I mean, is it a fun, awesome environment? Or are the instructors training by hostage? Now, talk to some of the trainers. You say, do you look like most of your classes really want to be here? Or are you training a bunch of hostages? And they'll joke and say, yeah, a lot of times it's training a bunch of hostages. Like, okay, because they're required to be here every day. You know, you get taken out, you're going to get sweaty, it's something different. You're like, oh, I don't want to go. And how many people look forward to, yes, today's the day I get to go roll around the mats? I mean, it might be fun, but how many people are looking forward to it? When you're there, you make the best of it. But how many people are like, yes, my day? Most people aren't. If you look at most law enforcement, ask around, who's itching to go there? Okay. Now, I always looked at law enforcement training as the people who don't need it are the ones do a radio check here. Can someone give me a sign?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. So we have a hostage situation. They're training. How well are you going to learn if you don't want to be there? If you're taking a class you don't want to be in. Might be kind of tough. We all know when you're being taught something you don't really want to learn, what is the comprehension level? What are you going to remember? It's pretty low. There's a lot of studies that go, it's pretty low. Could be 30%, could be 10%, could be a little less, depending on the situation. It's a lot of low numbers, not the numbers that you're like, oh, it's acceptable. It's not really acceptable. So we learned static training. And I always looked at people that went to certain types of, when they go to these training, the people that really put in a good effort are probably the ones that don't need to be there because they're supplementing outside. The people who aren't doing very much, probably the ones that need it, but they got to get through a certain amount of people. Now, this is not all law enforcement training. I'm not trying to put it all together as this is how it is. I want to give examples of sometimes why our poor behaviors are there. And now let's look at different types of training. We'll look at tactical scenarios. It's not all about punching and kicking. There's tactical scenarios. There's shooting. There's other types of investigative classes. But let's stick to tactics, because tactics is where we seem to get hurt more. We don't get hurt more because you missed a clue in an investigation that much. We get hurt because of the poor tactics, because of the poor mindset during these situations where tactical abilities will probably benefit you. When we lack scenarios a lot, law enforcement now is moving more into a scenario-based. Why do we go to these classes? Why do we tell people to go to classes? You have to have this many hours a month. You have to have this many days a year. So what does that tell somebody? Where's the mindset? I just have to get through this. A lot of our training is done by people that know this is just the guy that gets you through. So is there excitement and enthusiasm on their side? As trainers, do we have this? Are we living up to really what a trainer aspires to do? Is to help you take what I teach you in a classroom and move it out there on the street? Or have we come to, listen, I was told I have to train this, and I'm going to train it. How many times have we seen instructors throughout our career not really have a whole lot of confidence in what they're training? Okay, I have to give you this. This wasn't my idea. We have to get this done. We've all heard these things. And I'm not saying they're not right or wrong. I'm just saying is, what are they presenting to the student? Is there any motivation for the student to learn these things? Okay, let's just move past that. When I've learned training before, I learned excited delirium, which is, if you haven't dealt with it, someone under an intense amount of drugs and their body's going through some physiological reactions to the drugs. Their temperature goes up, they're having psychotic issues, and they're dying, and essentially their body's burning out, but they become very unpredictable and sometimes very strong during the time. We have this technique called the swarm technique. And it basically is, we'll approach the person from one direction. Someone will be on the other side of the person trying to get their attention. And there's 4 people that'll run up. One will grab each of the legs, bring them down. The next 2 people grab the arms. So everyone has an arm or a leg responsibility. Front person will control the head. It's very choreographed. It takes somebody who's going to have a lot of strength and not very controllable, not have the ability to control themselves, and bring this person under control under extreme circumstances. And we train it a lot. We have this machine where we train it, drag it down. It's got weights on it, so you're really kind of fighting it. And it's meant to take people in that are, you know, like I said, no weapons, but psychotic, and someone who deploy a taser at the same time to be able to manipulate the body in a way to make it not moving that much when we take it down. So I don't want to get too much into the technique. I just want to talk about the technique is taught with 4 officers, 2 by 2, standing behind the person. And during training, over and over again, we take down the person. Well, me being a supervisor and a trainer, I talk to new sergeants about, hey, how do you feel about this technique? It's never going to work. I mean, it's never going to work. No one's going to be standing there while we get behind them, 4 people, and run up behind them, grab 2 arms, grab 2 legs. It's not going to work. You know, it's just, yeah, it's training. They just had to give us something. So, but it's really not going to work that well. You know, you're 100% right. It's not going to work for you. It's not because the technique is flawed, but you can't see the technique. Yes, it's done in a very static environment, a very unrealistic environment. These people in real life are going to be all over the place. And we do it to basically a punching bag type of body hooked on a pen of cables to a bunch of weights. So we take it down. It's giving the impression that it's fighting. A lot of weight to it. So yeah, it's never going to happen that easy in real life. And therefore, a lot of officers went through the training, got the same training I did, and left with a completely different attitude about it. This is BS. It's never going to work. Well, when I explained to them, I said, well, what does it teach you? Well, it just teaches us, you know, you're grabbing arms and legs. I said, okay, if the guy's moving, there's 4 of us running. If I grab the left leg, what are you going to grab? Well, I grab the right leg. So what are the 2 people behind us going to grab? Well, they each grab an arm. And we bring the person down under control, right? If the person's on a run or the person's moving around. He's, yeah. I said, isn't that the technique? And he's like, well, yeah, but it wasn't set up the way. I said, techniques normally are learned. Sometimes they're a little complicated, but they're trying to teach you. There's a plan behind it. And I talked to countless officers that never saw the plan. All they saw is the static movements that in them in itself may not be 100% usable in real life based on the training, but if you take the concepts behind it, that there's a plan that if that person moves, everyone knows their part. Well, isn't that what a plan is? We do felony car stops all the time. How many times I've seen from a law enforcement trainer and supervisor, something happen at the last moment where the car turns in a direction that wasn't something where people planned on. And the tactic just went downhill from there. because it wasn't like it. They didn't take the concepts of, we're not teaching you to do it exactly 100% like this. We're teaching you a concept, to apply the concept how you need it. And sometimes it needs to be changed a little bit. I found in a lot of the training that I've been involved in that sometimes, because they have to train a certain way, but the training wasn't said, listen, we're teaching you a concept, a pattern to use on a certain set of circumstances, a filter to put over a certain set of behaviors to be able to use this. And I look at that as, is it the instructor's fault or is it the student's fault? Were they hostage so much they didn't think that much into it to say, I get it, we're in a gym, a controlled environment, this may not happen exactly like this, but there's some good ways that I can change this a little bit to be able to use it out in the field, just in case the guys are running and not just standing there, just in case this and this. Or do they just say, it's not going to work, and they go out? The mindset of the person in there. We can also apply the normalcy bias, the change blindness, the normalcy bias of nothing I ever use here works. They walk into the training with that in mind, how much are they going to get out of it? So as trainers, it's the training responsibility to say, hey, this is real. This can help you. Let me show you how. Yeah, we can practice static on a line and do this in a way, but they have to take it to the point of this is how it really will be out in the field. It's a little messier, but this is the same concepts you apply. And sometimes we see the lack in that. Why do we see the lack in that? There's always time for training, money for training, how many days, certain manpower issues. We can't keep people out of training, out of the line too long. And what do we have? Do we have sometimes our training a little bit cut short for the masses? You put in for specialized training, it's a little different, but I'm talking about the mass, the cookie cutter training that we push out to squads. Sometimes things get lost. Could these losses now try and deal with complacency issues? Because officers are getting training, they're just not applying it. Tactics, they're not applying them because they didn't go into it thinking that it was that important. These are all parts of complacency. How many times do we feel agencies are doing things because CYA? Oh my goodness, we've had some controversial things go out, so we're going to take a sensitivity class. We're going to take a understanding bias class. We're going to take these classes because some things have come out. Who approaches those classes with, you know what, this agency was lacking a little bit of sensitivity, and I'm going to go do my part and take this class, really pay attention because perhaps I could be a little bit more sensitive myself. 750,000 law enforcement officers in the United States. I don't think there's that many of them that actually had that mindset of having to take a class that maybe a lot of the agency looked at as, all right, this happened, we got to do this now. Everyone say, thanks, John. Can't have nice things because of you. And everyone's like, this wasn't me. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Just because one person made a mistake, we all got to suffer. And there's the mindset. There's the training issue that comes into complacency. Because now anything potentially that could have been taught in that class and used in that class, now there's a filter, there's a shield. And that really puts the emphasis on the instructor. How good does the instructor be able to fight through that complacency and get through it? How are they willing to take out the hostage situation, the cookie cutter, the CYA, to actually give someone training and now be able to take that training and show them how it applies into real life and have them really take it. Another training scenario I went through was entry into a building. In years previously, we had done a dynamic entry. We'd line up along the door, and we all move in within a second. One go this way, one go this way, one go the middle, one cover the door, and we'd have this SWAT team dynamic type of entry. And we practiced it for a lot of years. Every year we'd go over it again in tactics. It was good. Everyone kind of got used to it. It was something we all knew, we all learned, we all got pretty good at it. And then they changed it. They wanted to give us a threshold assessment, which is more of a dynamic cutting the pie before you go in. A little slower, a little more careful, but still entering a room, but now trying to see as much as you can from a tactical advantage before we enter the room. It makes sense. It's a good tool. And I'm sitting out in the waiting area, getting ready to go, my turn to go through the little scenario. And I hear some newer officers, 3 to 5 years, and they're like, you know what? I went through this a little bit ago, and they say they just tell you to go in the room. So we did it the way we've been doing it for years. Now all of a sudden we're all wrong, can't do anything right. You know, it's BS. You know what? You learn something for a while, they tell you this way to do it, this way to do it, and all of a sudden you're wrong. I'm like, okay, that's okay. And I'm looking, and they're like, hey, what do you think? They're looking at me. And I said, I'm not sure that you want to hear what I have to say, because I'm looking at this as there's one more tool for the toolbox. There's not one way to go into a room now. There's 2 ways. It's up to me to figure out which is the best one for this. And I said, I hope next year there's another one and another one, because I'd like 5 ways to go in, because walking in that door, you could be walking into something pretty bad. You want to have the amount of tools. And they dawned on it. And then I looked at some of the training. As I went through the training, I looked, and the attitudes of people coming out of the training, and it wasn't the instructors, it was the attitudes of some people in law enforcement that said, oh, you know what? I'm getting in trouble because I'm not doing the way they told us to do for years, whatever. Let me just do what they want us to do just so we can get out of here. Don't ask questions, just do it. Just let's get through it. See where I'm going with as far as how training sometimes makes us complacent. Did we learn a new tactic? Did we learn this? Did our training teach us to say, hey, let's use this out in the real world? Train the concepts. And I feel a lot of times law enforcement training lacks in the way we train things, because we train things in a certain way. It has to be done because you're training masses. You're not training one-on-one. I have to train a room of 50 people. That's a hard thing to do, to say, here's something you can learn, and you got to apply it out in the real world. With 50 people, 30 people, 20 people, that's a hard thing to do sometimes, because you don't have a lot of those examples to be able to do. So it makes it harder for law enforcement. So it tends to get more on the cookie cutter, because they have to move through a certain amount of people, a certain amount of time. That people are put in outside their normal schedule. They may be trained by hostage because last year's class was this. They don't really want to go. They don't want to be there for this. It's hot. It's this. It's that. And then sometimes there's not a scenario factor to it to be able to say, oh, wow, this can be used out there. And I'm not saying every agency, but I'm saying this is something that I've noticed through my 20 years in law enforcement and training in a variety of different venues, from academy to in-service to advanced training that's outside agency, as well as people coming into the agency. How often are they really putting in how you take this outside? And then when you get out to the street, are they continuing the training out there? Is it being emphasized out there? Remember your training, remember your training. I see it in more of a military context, where you talk to people and they said, yeah, you know, everyone's trained the exact same way. We learn it a certain way, and this is what we do. This is how we make it. So the training is continued on after the class. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Now, let's move on to operational, because training moves into operational. Operational is the final component. How does operational, when I say operational, how does our agency work? Agencies work. How do they allow us to either act a certain way, either to be complacent or not complacent? Do they make it better or worse? Sometimes they make it better, sometimes they make it worse. So we have rules, we have SOPs, we have GOs. We have ways we're supposed to do things. We come to a certain call, we're supposed to do A, B, C, and D. How many times have you been, as an officer, a deputy, a first line, and you get to a call, you're looking at the call, you're sensing what you need to do, and you're told over the radio by someone who's not there what you're going to do? Okay, what does that do for you? The micromanaging effect. What does that do for most people? Most of the time it shuts you off. So are you thinking now? Probably not. You're frustrated. Or you're just deciding this person outranks me, I'm going to do what they say. So you start following the rules. And now are you thinking for yourself? Have they taken away a little bit of the thinking for yourself? So now you're doing what someone else wants you to do. You may be a little frustrated. Are you going to see the things? Are you going into a loop on what the person tells you? Are you that officer looking for the person with the ammunition gun going through the school from the example earlier? And you're not looking for the bombs now because you're totally focused on one thing? How does supervision help you? Now, I'd like to get into a lot of the supervision of leadership styles, of more of a allowing officers to do their job without supervision getting involved in supervision, just keeping them between the boundaries of the rules, laws, case laws, and SOPs, and letting them go the way they want inside there, which is a good way to go, but sometimes it's not realistic. But we have the CYA. We have rules and SOPs we're governed by. We have different managers that are a little bit stifling on how they handle things. And then you have some units and some managers and supervisors that are completely removed from the situation. So it's hard to find that happy medium. Where I've been in certain areas, and I'm going to give you a real example of something, and not even at the agency that I work in, that I was doing a ride along with another agency for a training scenario, and we pulled up to a call where a person who had some mental illness issues was in a parking lot. It was someone the officers dealt with every single night. Just minor issues, lived with his mom, he was an adult. When he hadn't been taking his medications or he was riled up, he'd be in the parking lot making some noise, but a relatively benign event. Officers show up, the guy's sitting there, I'm with the supervisor, we pull up at 20 minutes after the fact, the guy's sitting in the parking lot, the 4 officers are around him. What are you gonna do with this? Well, we have, and he's, no, I don't know what you have. What's your plan of action? Well, it's a, so the guy's just like, no, I don't want to know what the guy did, what he's doing. I want to know what your plan of action is. And the officers couldn't answer this question. Now, the supervisor I was with was not the normal supervisor. He said, listen, is he under arrest? Well, no. We have a crime? No. Baker Act? No. Are you just going to beat him up in a parking lot? Well, no. Okay, what are you going to do with him then? Got to make some kind of plan. At least tell me where you're going so I can tell you whether I agree or not. There was no plan. It's a relatively simple effect. The supervisor recognized the guy and said, hey, John, go home. The guy went up to his mom's. That's how they handled it every single night, except for this new squad, these officers. Now, these officers were not like, I'm one day out of my training period. They were on for about a year and a half, newer officers, but not completely new. And the question came down as to why. Well, the answer came out that in the past, their supervisor would show up on these scenes, tell them what they had and what their course of action was. These officers went a year and a half in some cases, never making a decision on a call of any consequence. Where's their training? Complacency may not be the issue because where's their mind? Are they shut off or are they engaged? Are they trying to figure things out or are they be waiting for the answer? They're essentially a little mice in a lab hitting a button for a food pellet. I go to a call, hit a button, food pellet comes out. That's all I'm going to do because that's all I know. That's how I get my food. So a lot of times the way we're managed really, and I want to get in complacency, affects our alertness. So I've covered a lot, and there's a lot more to it. I want to just give you the basics of it. We've studied how people's mindset affects their functioning, their daily functions, how the psychology works for us and against us, how our training issues affect how we perform out in the field or don't perform out in the field, and how our agency as a whole shapes how we act in the field. Now, complacency is a big word, but it's really the only word that I'm really looking for is we are looking at how do we How do we change the way officers act and think in the field to benefit them and cut out a lot of the detraction that we have, such as highly complacent, people missing things they should never have missed. We've all probably watched videos on YouTube of law enforcement officers, and how many times are we going, oh my God, and how many times are you banging your head on the desk because you're seeing things and you're like, how can this happen? How does he not see this? How does she not see this? And then something bad happens. And you're like, you're kind of torn. Do you blame the officer? You're like, this happened because you're dumb? Or do you just think maybe there's something else to you? You're not paying attention, or just really sneak up on you? Now let's move away from these 4 parts and talk about how the brain works, how people work. People don't really multitask like we think you can multitask. You can do 5 things at once. It's not really 5 things at once. You have an attention span. Just to use 100%. 100% of my attention, my ability is 100% to do stuff. Well, I'm going to start this with an example. First time I got into a patrol car. You get in and there's a radio and it's not stopping. There's a computer and you got to know the stuff on the computer. You got to drive. There's a cage in the back, so it's hard to see in the back of you. You probably had a training officer and they're barking off a whole bunch of things. My training officer wanted me to drive around an area I didn't know, never been in that area before, and call out every traffic infraction that I saw. Whether I was going to stop it or not, call it out. Call out every suspicious person that I saw, or things that look out of place. I may not stop him, he just wanted to know that I'm seeing him. And he's talking to me about other things. So now there's looking for suspicious things, looking for traffic infractions, driving in an area I've never been in before, trying to hear a radio, trying to hear my training officer, trying to view the computer when I can, and also having visibility issues around the car with the cage and stuff. It's a lot of things to do. I'm surprised I made it out of the parking lot. I'm surprised I found out a way to put the car in park. That's a lot to do for something you've never done before. Day 1, I found it almost overwhelming, where I was like missing everything. And I was getting lost. He's telling me where to go. I'm missing turns. I just, it was overwhelming. Day 1. Skip ahead a couple years. It's easy. It's second nature. So on day 1, how much of my 100% was I using just maneuvering the vehicle in a safe fashion without killing us both? Probably a lot. 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. I don't know. Maybe sometimes it could be up to 78%. Sometimes it might be a little bit lower, 30 or 40%, because there's a lot going on. So how much did I have left? Not a lot. I've been doing this 20 years. All of that now probably fits in the 10%, maybe less of my attention span because I've been doing it so long. The radio is second nature. Looking at the computer, I know exactly where to look on the screen for what I need, so I minimize my time of looking for it. I'm driving around an area that I know well, looking for violations and things are second nature. I'm probably using a lot less of my brain power. So now I have 80 or 90% to do what I want to do with. So I can look for certain things. I can be more aware of my surroundings because what I'm doing now is less. So we think of new officers, we think of all the things we're asking them to do, and they miss certain things. Can you see why? This is a new thing. This is a new set of experiences, a new set of behaviors, a new set of ways that they have to map their mind around to actually get to do things. So now what happens? They're going to use a lot till they figure it out and they get more of that 100% because they're using less of their brain power because this just becomes second nature. We've all experienced this in your jobs. I'm sure a lot of you can kind of sympathize. You're nodding your head. Yeah, I see that. If you're still new and you're like, it's still overwhelming, at time it won't be. So we look at how people use their brain. Now, I teach a class on body language, deception, and high-risk environments. I know that I'm giving someone a lot of information, sometimes in 3 to 5 days. And I know I dump all this information on them. On day 4, are they going to be able to use it? Well, the answer is no, not to 100%, because this is all new behaviors for them to find. They have to get into the mindset of doing a traffic stop and looking for the behaviors I found it. Because if they're not behavior focused, putting these things that I've taught them, infusing them in their traffic stop, into their subject stop, into their responding to a domestic, into their responding to a suspicious person, that's where you really get to learn it, infusing it into your already done behaviors. Now let's look back at training and operational. I learned a new tactic. My instructor didn't really tell me how good it was going to be out in the field. I was there by hostage. It's a cookie cutter thing. I didn't really like it. And these may all not be factual, but my perception is what we're dealing with. If I'm there and I don't really want to be there and I'm not learning, it's probably not going to get in there too well. Just say it does get in there. Am I going to take it and infuse it into my behaviors, into the things that I already are easy now? I've learned how to drive the car with all those distractions. I don't really want to add a ninth in there because that throws it all off again. So if they give me this new piece of equipment, hey, you got to use this now. I've already got this down pat. And now I got to throw something else in there. Now it throws my whole, now I got to readjust all over again to this. It's a hard function because I've been around for a while. I don't really want to readjust to new things anymore. It's hard. It's difficult. I got enough things going on. See where I'm going with this? In our training, how it's presented, our mindset toward it now, that's only part of it. We take it with us and say, I learned these behaviors in Bo's body language class, and I'm going to insert them into this action, my traffic stop, because I'm a traffic car. I work a high crime drug area, my subject stop, in my domestic dispute, in my suspicious person call, and all these calls. I'm going to take it, I'm going to change the way I do things to take into account their behaviors more often. That's a lot. So when they leave my class, what are they going to do it? I can only give them so much. Now I try and work into my class ways. I show a lot of examples. I give them practical examples. We talk about the things that we go into. But what I also do is from day one, start them small. I give them examples. Here's a worksheet. Work on it during your break, looking at behaviors. We gradually ramp up the behaviors. And the reason I do that is by the end of my training, it's not just me standing in front of them, showing them videos and talking and letting them, watching them nod in and out or, be on their phone or whatever. It's at the end, they've seen over the course, one, through worksheets, but also two, I give them a test where they look at pictures and they choose the body language they want for those pictures. And it's normally pretty bad compared to last day, but I don't check it, just make them do it. On the last day, we look at the same pictures and say, now write down what you see there. So they themselves have seen, oh, wow, I actually know what to write now. And I've been doing these worksheets and experiments the whole time in these exercises, and I've seen it. So when they walk out, they have the information, but they also have the experience of saying, I saw it, I did it, I used it, it works. And now there's that confidence of putting it back into what they do. And I look at sometimes we lack the training structure to be able to do that, or the abilities sometimes because the way our training is set up. We also lack the operational part, the supervision, the command staff, the way we function as an agencies to really reinforce these on all the different levels. To be able to say, put this in there. Let me show you how it works. Let me show you in the field how this training actually benefits you and how that was a good thing. Even though you may not have understood it, here's the actual beneficial, because it's all about your mindset, how you look at things. And it really comes down to the first thing. I could really stop at mindset. Psychology, training, and operational, all is secondary to the mindset. Because the mindset, how you're taking this, when you sit in a class, when you go to a call, are you ready for the change? Are you looking for the changes? Are you understanding that, yeah, I've been to 3,000 of these calls, but this one might be different? That's the thing we're looking for. Well, how do you do that? In my behavior classes, I try and train one thing. Change you into a hunter mindset. And a hunter mindset doesn't mean that I'm out looking to hunt something down. I'm looking for changes. I'm constantly looking for the behaviors because the behaviors will tell me something's changing and I'm willing to look at it. It's a hard thing to do. And I can just say, be hunter mindset, okay? And you go out. Does that change the complacency? Does it change your behavior? Does it change how you act? Yes and no, probably no. In order to get past complacency, in the time in my career, which is a lot of time now, that I've tried to get past it and tried to understand what it is and be able to move myself out, I've done two things in mind. And I'm not saying this is the best ways, but I think if you do these two things every single day, you train your brain to open it, to stop looking at patterns, to stop looking at, I've done 10,000 traffic stops, this one might be different. Or to look at this going to be the same. And chances are it is going to be the same. I was a person in my class that 10,000 traffic stops in his career said about. I said, how many times does someone shoot you? None. How many times does someone get out and try and kill you? No. Been in a fight? Yeah, a couple times, handful. Most of the time they just, you walk up, you give them the ticket, what they want, give them the ticket and go. 10,000 times. How do you get that out of someone's head that one might be different? You can tell them all you want, but it's a hard behavioral brick wall to fight past. So it's a hard one to get past. So how do you get past it anyway? We're in law enforcement. We have to get past it. We don't want to be the next statistic. We don't want our partner to be the next statistic. But it doesn't just magically happen. There's two things that I've done that I've tried to help, that I've tried to get past this. Is one, I give myself a task. I'm a behavior guy. I like body language. I like to look at the way people behave. I run the behavioral analysis training group, and I'm constantly always looking at the psychology, the body language, and why people do certain things. Every single person I look at, I'm looking for a set code of behaviors. I like closed, open, and pointing, which is one of the foundations of one of my classes that I look at. And it looks at comfort and attention. Closed and open is comfort versus discomfort. And I'm not going to go into the whole class, but basically closed body language, open body language shows your comfort level. Attention is where you're pointed toward, your eyes, your body, what you're looking at. It may or may not tell me one thing or another, but the fact that every single person I look at, I'm looking at you to see what it is, or if it changes when I look at you, is something now that I have that hunter mindset. I'm looking for the behaviors of every person in the room, which means now I have all this thousands of hours of training in other body language. When I see something, because I'm already in that mindset of looking, my RAS is looking for that one car that I'm going to see a million of now. So I'm looking at the behaviors. The RAS focuses my mental power, my brain, on looking for those behaviors now. And now I'm noticing a lot more. I'm going to pick up a lot more because I focus my brain, just telling it, look for closed, open, and pointing. If you take in my class, the COP method, closed, open, pointing, COP. Easy to remember, even for law enforcement and us. But I've given myself a task. So I'm already showing that I'm looking. That's one way. The second way is preparing for something. You can't prepare someone to get shot at unless you shoot at them. And they really think you're probably going to kill them. Or else it's just training. I can get an airsoft gun, a semi-munition gun, or paintball gun, or whatever, a toy gun, and we can play. And I can train you what to do if you get shot at, or if someone pulls a gun on you, or a knife on you, or punches you. We can train these things indefinitely. But there's training indefinitely, and then there's training for real life scenarios. In real life, at a stress level 10, it's hard. But if you train a whole bunch of times, the behaviors, there's a better chance you're going to do well at level 10. As I'm walking up to a house, a call, walking down the street, I picture in my mind, what happens if someone walks out the front door of that house with a gun and takes a shot at me? What am I going to do? I look for cover. I picture myself drawing my gun, moving to where I need to look for. Now, it sounds kind of stupid, but if you think about it, It's giving us options. It's training our brain to think of options at a moment's notice in a high stress situation, but we're taking away the high stress. So now how does that work? There was a behavior done, there was a study done. And I'm not going to give the specifics, I'm just going to go over the study. It's been recreated in a variety of different ways, but this one tells the best. There's 3 people sitting at a table, and they have a puzzle in front of them. It's a child's puzzle. It's easy to put together. So and they have these apparatus on their head that reads the brain waves and brain activity in their head. And they go to the first person and says, person number 1, please put the puzzle together. The person puts the puzzle together. Okay. Moves to person 2. Person 2. Don't move. Don't touch the puzzle. Just look at it. I'm going to tell you how it goes together. And he tells them, put the green piece and the red piece and blue piece and put them together like this. And explains it to them, but they don't touch the puzzle at all. The third person, he says, person 3, look at the puzzle, figure it out, and picture yourself putting it together in your mind without touching it. So the person looks at it, and you can tell he's going back and forth looking at it. Okay, it's together. So they took the 3 brain scans, and they gave them to a person who studies brain scans. And they picked out the person in the middle, person number 2, right away, because there was less brain power, because he's just being told what to do. But person number 1, who actually put the puzzle together, and person number 3, who just pictured themselves putting the puzzle together, a doctor who didn't see the study couldn't tell the difference, couldn't tell who did what. The brain scans were the same. So now, did person 1 and person 3 get the same experience of the puzzle? Based on their brain activity, it would say yes. So now let's take that as best we can. I'm walking up to a house, walking down the street to a call, and I picture someone coming out of the door with a gun. And I picture myself drawing my gun. I picture myself moving the cover. I picture myself shooting. Or whatever the scenario is. Every time I'm walking down the street, if I picture a different scenario, I see a car coming down the street and I picture the car's going to swerve real fast and try and hit me. So I'm thinking, what do I do? I can move here. Oops, there's a car here. There's a tree here. Where do I go? I'm making my brain think a lot faster. I'm prepping it for 1, understanding there are a lot of things that could happen. So I'm beating down and trying to suppress the normalcy bias. I'm focusing my RAS now to look for threats, to look for things out of the ordinary, to look for behaviors. So I can look at the behavior and say, that makes sense. That makes sense. This is a little bit weird. Let me look more at this one. So by the 2 things of giving myself a focus on behaviors and giving myself scenarios, I'm training myself to react to these certain things. Now, I can't simulate walking up to a call and having a person coming out with a shotgun and taking a shot at me. It's just something that I can't simulate. And when it happens, who knows what's going to happen? If you look at reaction times, you know, there's studies on reaction times, and a lot of it there's a lot that goes into it, but they talk about each movement, each part of it is about 1/4 of a second. So I look up and I see the shotgun, 1/4 of a second. Uh-oh, that's a bad thing, 1/4 of a second. I should do something bad, 1/4 of a second. Now I start to move. It's been almost a second. What could happen in that second? It doesn't seem like a lot, but it could be a lot in that situation if I'm looking at the barrel, because the projectile will get me in a second. So there's now, by the time I end up moving and my gun's up and I'm returning fire, am I at 1.5 seconds? Am I at 2 seconds? Am I at 2.5 seconds? 3 seconds? Depending on where your mindset's at, depending on where you are. If you're thinking about, you know, something completely way off, and all of a sudden you just happen to look, chances are you're going to, because you're further outside that attention of, hey, I'm here to do a job, I'm thinking about something way off the fact, oh my goodness, what am I going to buy my kids for Christmas this year? Now we're looking at more of those little bits of seconds that are ticking away before you're actually in a constructive action where you're shooting, you're drawing, you're moving to cover, you're hiding behind something, you're doing something that's actually going to help you versus not. So I train my brain to be active and looking for behaviors, and I also train myself that when someone comes out, I'm already thinking of this. So while I can't, like I said, I can't train myself to actually what I'm going to do, I can't tell you because it never happened. But do you think the likelihood of me training my brain to when someone comes out of the house, someone across the street with a gun, my instant reaction is going to be what I practice in my mind over and over and over again of immediately looking for cover, moving, drawing as I'm moving, being able to shoot. And what I do also is I put in the safety features. In my mind, I'm thinking to myself, what's behind that person? Is it safe to shoot? In those scenarios, the person comes out with a child with them sometimes. I have to make that determination, shoot or stay behind cover. So I add these things into myself so that is my complacency, am I going to be as complacent as someone who doesn't do these? I think the answer is no. And not just because I'm telling you this, I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm giving myself a reason. I'm never going to be caught off guard. I may not see everything coming, but my brain is already in that mode of watching for behaviors and thinking about reactions already. My RAS is tuned to watching a hunter type behavior, looking for behaviors. I want to see everyone assess their behavior as they go by. So I'm looking, keeping eye contact, and I'm putting myself in certain scenarios. So I'm training my brain for these two things. And that's how I feel you can get out of the complacency. Now, is it that easy to just say, hey, I'm going to do it? Unless you really commit to it and you're consistent with it, it's really not going to be something you can just say, that's a great idea, I'm going to go do it. It takes time. Talk about mindset, building up your abilities, making sure those abilities will stand with the actual encounter. Never fought anyone in your whole life, never taken a martial arts class, never punched a punching bag, but you're all gung-ho and you run up to some 6'4" MMA fighter. How's that mindset going to hold up when you come face to face with that if you've never trained for this in your life? There's pros and cons. If your mindset does stick up, it's probably not a good thing either. You have to understand what your limitations are and work around them. Understand your limitations, work to build your limitations up, but understand them. So I just wanted to kind of go over, this is my way of looking into complacency, how I look at it, and how it's something that anyone in law enforcement is really susceptible to. It's not just good cops, it's not bad cops, it's everybody, it's human beings. We get tied up. There's no one here that hasn't gone to work with only a couple hours sleep because they have a young child. There's no one that's gone to work that hasn't left some domestic situation where it's still weighing on your mind because you got an argument with a significant other before you left or the night before, and it's still on your mind. That no one here hasn't had financial issues. No one here hasn't moved. No one here hasn't had things that go on in your home life that creep into your work life. They have to. So we got to think of things. How many days have we gone to work and we're just here because we're lucky? We weren't in that frame of mind to be there. We weren't in that frame of mind to make the reactions that we should have. And why are we here? Probably just because nothing happened that day. I realize every day I go to work and nothing comes home, especially I've gone to work with days when my mind just wasn't there because of things going on in your life. Not feeling good. How many times have we gone to work sick? You have the flu, you're stuffy headed, you're never really coherent during those times. We don't go to work during these times. But the big one didn't hit that day. And we got lucky. Divine intervention, luck, whatever you want to call it. There's always times that we, is that complacent? Sure. It's a different type of complacent we don't think about that much. Our biases are types of complacency. They're psychological mechanisms built into your brain for you not to see certain things until you understand what they are and learn to fight past them. Our training is given to us sometimes whether we want it or not. How many times have we just not paying attention during training, not took it seriously because of whatever? Probably if you've been around long enough, it's probably been a couple times. And then operational, how many times have you been stifled or felt you were stifled or too controlled to where your mind kind of shut off a little bit by the operational side of your job, by what the citizens think you should be doing, should not be doing. How many people have not reacted as well because they're worried about what's going to happen? In today's world, it's very uncertain for us. We do our job right. There's cities burning because officers did the right thing. It's a tough one. It's tough decisions to make. And complacency is a much larger problem. I won't say problem. It's a larger issue that every officer needs to tackle. It's not just about someone being lazy or complacent or not paying attention or not following training or not doing what they're supposed to do. It's not that. It's not the lazy, incompetent person. That's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. So I wanted to go through this. I will have more trainings on this. My website is behavioralanalysistraining.com. If you probably found this also on Facebook, where I put some training out, please look at the training that I have. I do get into this in all my classes, whether it looks like it or not. I do classes that deal with advanced deception detection. There's a body language deception in high-risk environments, which is the flagship class. And I'm also doing some classes this year on lethal encounters, verbalization, articulation of use of force events, to be able to show officers how to explain things. It's not a creative writing class. It's giving names for the behaviors. I see most officers, when I show up to events, did the right thing. But sometimes they don't know the right words to say they did the right thing. And it really comes down to explaining ourselves the first time around. Because if you can explain it with confidence right off the bat, it helps you all through the process. I'm not looking just to sit here and make it a sales tactic, but I've gone through the whole thing without mentioning it. There's also a book that I've written called Stay Ready. And in this, it talks about behavioral awareness. And it's not about body language as much. It is about body language, but it's more about understanding the world around you. It's not a simple body language book. It talks about, I don't like the term situational awareness because sometimes that gets a little bit, I don't need to walk in a room and notice there's 9 chairs and 2 windows. I'm sure that stuff can be great in a James Bond movie, but not where I'm looking at. I want to look into a room and understand the behaviors of every person in that room and how those behaviors pertain to me and how complacency blocks us from seeing a lot of those behaviors. So I do go into complacency in the book, and then I go into how to utilize understanding of human behaviors to counter that. I've gone into it a very easy way of just saying look for COP. The book goes into understanding behaviors, understanding mindsets, looking at certain environments and using your environment, profiling the types of behaviors you want to see in an environment, and then so you can pick out the outliers in that environment of people you want to look for. So you can walk through a environment of 100 people, 1,000 people, and know the behaviors to pick out that are probably the people that you need to keep an eye on. And all of this is trying to alleviate the complacency by giving you something to do when you're out there in the street. There's body language you're looking at for your interactions, but behavioral awareness is the whole thing. The whole design, and I don't really mention it in the book, but I'll mention it here, the whole design of that book is to keep your mind active when you're going places. So the complacency, the things that we think that one of the biggest problems in law enforcement is complacency, it goes away. And when I say biggest problem, people will kind of roll their eyes and say, well, that's debatable. And I'll fight someone every day, argue them out every day about complacency is the biggest problem. We see people, officers that are too much force, acting poorly and starting problems. It comes down to how their mindset is. What they came to work to do, what they're perceiving. We get officers that have never been punched in the face before. They haven't prepared themselves mentally before. What happens in a use of force event? They're going to overreact, they're going to underreact because they don't have a plan. Part of complacency. They haven't prepared for what they needed to. That's what this is for. And I'm not blaming every officer. I'm not blaming officers who have these things because a lot of times this training has never come out. In 20 years, I've never heard the things that I'm saying. That's why I'm saying it now. It took me a long time to kind of figure out that complacency is not just a word of laziness. It's something more. It's a much larger thing that we all get tied into at one point throughout our day, definitely our careers, and how to fight it. Because if we can master this one topic, I don't see how this would not change how law enforcement functions for the better. It has to, because you're letting people, they're understanding, they're not getting surprised, they're more mentally prepared for whatever comes in front of them. If you train them right and they have the ability, there's no reason why every call shouldn't turn out the right way. We shouldn't have these issues. I know I said this is going to be from 2 to 4. I'm going to stop the recording, and we can talk about some questions if anyone would like.